What would you do if the people you trusted most turned against you? Imagine building your life around love and loyalty, only to discover that betrayal came not just from your spouse but from your own children. How would you react? Could you forgive them, or would you choose a different path? Welcome to Unheard Stories, where we share the most gripping tales of betrayal, heartbreak, and revenge. In today's story, a devoted husband discovers the unimaginable: his wife's infidelity and his daughter's role in hiding it. But instead of letting anger consume him, he takes a different approach, a calculated plan to make them regret their choices. Before we dive in, I want to hear from you. Where are you watching from today? Comment below. Your stories and perspectives make this channel what it is. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button. If you enjoy raw, emotional tales like this one, you won't want to miss what we have coming next. Grab your seat because this story will leave you speechless. For almost 30 years, the protagonist, a hardworking, devoted family man, believed he had built the life most people dream of. He married Jane when they were both young, broke, and wildly in love. Together, they worked through financial struggles, shared countless milestones, and raised two beautiful daughters, Alice and Maddie. From the outside, their family seemed picture-perfect. Laughter-filled holidays, shared vacations, and a bond that others envied. Jane, the wife, was the heart of the family. She was warm, supportive, and seemed to have it all together. Her nurturing nature kept the family grounded through tough times. But beneath her polished exterior, Jane harbored secrets. Unknown to her husband, cracks had begun to form in their seemingly solid foundation. Their daughters, Alice and Maddie, were their pride and joy. Alice, the eldest at 26, was the high achiever, always excelling academically and professionally. She was engaged to her longtime boyfriend, and her upcoming wedding was a source of pride for the entire family. Maddie, the youngest at 24, was the carefree, cheerful one, a daddy's girl who had always been close to her father. Together, they painted the picture of a family rooted in love and trust. But every perfect picture has its flaws. It started small, subtle changes in Jane's behavior that the husband brushed off as nothing. She began spending more time on her phone, dressing up for girls' dinners, and occasionally coming home later than expected. Her explanations were always casual and believable, too believable. Jane wasn't the only one acting differently. Alice and Maddie had become unusually close to their mother, whispering in corners and planning outings that excluded their father. Though he noticed these shifts, he chalked it up to the natural evolution of relationships in a growing family. The truth was, Jane had been hiding a double life, and the daughters, whether out of loyalty, fear, or misguided love, had become complicit. They lied to cover for their mother, helping her maintain a facade of innocence. The husband remained blissfully unaware, content in his belief that his family was unshakable. But the cracks in their foundation were widening, and soon, they would come crashing down in a way he could never have anticipated. Little did he know, the life he had worked so hard to build was nothing more than an illusion, and the betrayal lurking beneath the surface would push him to the brink of heartbreak and revenge. It started as a typical weekday evening. Jane had mentioned she was going out for dinner with Alice and Maddie, something they did regularly. They called it their girls' night, a chance for the three of them to bond over food and laughter. The husband always encouraged these outings, feeling proud that his wife and daughters shared such a close relationship. That evening, Jane was upstairs getting ready, humming softly as she picked out an outfit. The husband was in the kitchen, sipping coffee and scrolling through his phone, when Jane's phone buzzed on the counter. Normally, he would have ignored it, but something about the timing caught his attention. The message was from an unsaved number, and the preview read, "Can't wait to see you tonight." At first, he thought it must be a mistake. Maybe it was from one of the girls or a friend. But curiosity got the better of him. He picked up the phone and opened the message. What he found froze him in place. The messages were from Jane's boss, a man she had occasionally mentioned but never with much detail. The texts were casual but intimate, too intimate for a professional relationship. One message read, "I miss you. Once a week isn't enough." Jane had responded, "I miss you too." His heart pounded in his chest as he scrolled further. The exchange made it clear that this wasn't just a harmless friendship. The flirty tone, the affectionate language, it all pointed to something deeper. Something he couldn't ignore. Shock turned to disbelief. This can't be real, he thought. Not Jane. Not my wife. When Jane came downstairs a few minutes later, she was dressed to perfection, her usual warm smile lighting up her face. She kissed him on the cheek and said, "Don't wait up, okay? We might be late." Her tone was so casual, so normal that it made his stomach churn. He forced a smile and replied, "Have fun with the girls." The moment she left, he sprang into action. Grabbing her phone, he turned on location sharing, a step he had never imagined taking but felt he had no choice. He needed to know the truth. Sitting at the kitchen table, he stared at his own phone, watching the location update. His heart sank when he saw that Jane wasn't heading to the restaurant where she and the girls usually met. Instead, she was driving to a location the family had visited many times, a cozy restaurant on the edge of town. Confused and desperate for clarity, he texted Alice and Maddie, "What time are you meeting Mom for dinner?" Their responses came almost immediately. Alice replied, 7 p.m. "Can't wait to see her." Maddie sent a similar message. His blood ran cold. They were lying. His own daughters were covering for their mother. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. Not only was Jane betraying him, but Alice and Maddie were complicit in her deceit. The family he had poured his heart into was hiding a terrible secret. Determined to confirm his suspicions, he grabbed his car keys and drove to the restaurant. His hands trembled on the steering wheel as he parked a short distance away. Through the large front window, he spotted Jane sitting at a table near the back, with her boss. They were laughing, leaning in close, holding hands. Completely unaware of the storm brewing just outside. It felt like his chest was caving in. The woman he had built his life with, the woman he had trusted implicitly, was sharing an intimacy with someone else. A man who wasn't him. He snapped a picture of them through the window, his hands shaking as he hit the button. He wasn't sure why he did it. Maybe to prove to himself that it was real. Maybe because he knew he'd need it later. Driving away, his mind raced with emotions. Anger, sadness, disbelief. How long had this been going on? How many times had they laughed at his expense? Sitting in his car, staring at the picture on his phone, he made a decision. He opened their family group chat and sent the photo with a single caption. "Glad you're enjoying girls' dinner." Then he turned off his phone and drove aimlessly before landing at his brother's house. That night, as he lay awake on the couch, his mind replayed everything. Every moment Jane had smiled at him, every hug from Alice and Maddie, every time they'd said, "I love you." It all felt hollow now, tainted by their lies. He couldn't wrap his head around how his daughters could betray him so easily. He had raised them to value honesty and integrity, yet they had chosen to side with their mother, covering up her affair and lying to his face. The betrayal was more than just an affair, it was a shattering of the trust that had held his family together. And as he stared at the ceiling, unable to sleep, one thing became clear. His life would never be the same again. 2 days after discovering Jane's affair, the husband decided it was time to confront her. Avoiding the situation had only intensified his pain. He needed answers, if not to fix things then to find closure. Late that night, he sent her a text. "We need to talk. Tomorrow. 10 a.m. At the house." Her reply came almost immediately, "I'll be there. Please just let me explain." The next morning he arrived at the house early, the weight of the upcoming confrontation pressing heavily on his chest. The home, once a sanctuary of love and memories, now felt cold and hollow. As he waited, his eyes wandered to the family photos on the walls. Smiling faces stared back at him, mocking the betrayal that now defined his family. Jane arrived right on time. She looked nervous, her eyes red and puffy as though she'd been crying for days. She stepped through the door cautiously, holding her phone like a shield. Notably, her wedding ring was absent. That small detail stung more than he expected. "Thanks for agreeing to meet," she said softly, her voice trembling. "Don't thank me," he replied coldly. "I'm not here to make this easier for you." Her face crumpled, but she nodded, taking a seat at the dining room table, the same table where they had shared countless family dinners. He sat across from her, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. Jane launched into an explanation before he could say anything. "It wasn't serious," she began, her words rushing out. "It didn't mean anything. It was just a mistake." "A mistake?" he repeated, his voice steady but icy. "A mistake is forgetting an anniversary or burning dinner. This wasn't a mistake. This was a choice you made repeatedly, knowing exactly what you were doing." Her eyes filled with tears. "I was unhappy," she said, her voice cracking. "I didn't mean for it to go this far. I never wanted to hurt you." He leaned forward, his tone cutting. "Unhappy? And instead of coming to me, instead of trying to fix things, you decided to sneak around behind my back and drag our daughters into it? You didn't just betray me, Jane. You destroyed everything we built together." Jane's tears flowed freely now. "I didn't want them involved. I never wanted that. They were just trying to protect me." "And what about protecting me?" he shot back, his voice rising for the first time. "Did you ever think about what this would do to me? Or were you too busy enjoying your little secret? She sobbed, covering her face with her hands, but he felt no sympathy. For the first time, her tears didn't move him. After a long silence, he stood. "This marriage is over," he said firmly. "You'll hear from my lawyer soon. Don't expect this to end in your favor." As he turned to leave, Jane stood too, desperation in her voice. "Please don't do this. We can fix it. Think about the girls, the family." He froze, turning back to face her. "The family?" he spat. "The same family you dragged through the mud? Alice and Maddie made their choices when they chose to lie to me and protect you. They betrayed me just as much as you did." Jane's face crumpled further, but he didn't stay to hear her response. He walked out of the room, his heart pounding with a mix of anger and heartbreak. Later that day he texted both daughters, asking to meet them separately. Maddie was the first. They met at a park near his brother's house, a neutral space where he could control his emotions. Maddie arrived looking distraught, her eyes swollen from crying. As soon as she sat beside him on the bench, she broke down. "Dad, I'm so sorry," she said, her voice trembling. "I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to hurt you." He let her cry for a moment before speaking. "Then why did you lie to me, Maddie? Why did you cover for her?" "She told me it was just a phase," Maddie whispered. "She said it would end soon, that there was no point in blowing up the family. I thought I was helping." He shook his head, his voice filled with disappointment. "You don't help someone by lying for them. You don't protect a family by betraying the truth. Do you have any idea how much this has hurt me?" Maddie sobbed harder, covering her face. "I'll do anything to fix this, Dad. Please, just tell me what to do." "I don't know if we can fix this," he said quietly. "I need time. I need to figure out if I can ever trust you again." Her shoulders shook as she nodded, but he didn't stay long. He left her there, her sobs echoing behind him. The meeting with Alice was entirely different. They met at a coffee shop and Alice arrived late, looking polished and composed. Her calm demeanor immediately irritated him. "Thanks for meeting me," she said, sitting down with an air of detachment. He wasted no time. "Why didn't you tell me about your mother's affair?" Alice sighed, leaning back in her chair. "Dad, I didn't want to get involved. This is between you and Mom." "Not getting involved?" he said, his voice rising. "You lied to me. You covered for her. That's not staying out of it, that's choosing sides." "I wasn't choosing sides," Alice said defensively. "I was trying to keep the peace." "Peace for who? For me or for your mother?" She looked away, refusing to answer. "You're an adult, Alice," he said firmly. "If your fiancé did to you what your mother did to me, would you want everyone around you to lie and protect him? Or would you want the truth?" Her face hardened. "It's different, Dad. Mom made a mistake. It doesn't mean you have to throw everything away." "A mistake?" he repeated, his voice full of disbelief. "This wasn't a mistake. This was a betrayal, by your mother, by you, by Maddie. And you're sitting here acting like I'm overreacting?" Alice crossed her arms. "So what? You're just going to cut us out of your life? Pretend we don't exist?" "I don't know," he said honestly. "But I can't pretend this didn't happen." As he stood to leave, he added, "The rest is up to you." That night, sitting alone, the weight of their betrayal hit him harder than ever. His family had shattered, and while Jane's actions were unforgivable, the complicity of his daughters cut even deeper. For the first time he considered cutting them all out of his life, realizing that trust once broken is almost impossible to rebuild. The initial shock of betrayal was devastating. The husband felt as though his entire world had crumbled beneath him. But as the days passed, the sharp sting of heartbreak began to dull, replaced by a cold, clear determination. He couldn't undo the damage that had been done, but he could take control of what happened next. If Jane and the daughters had chosen betrayal, he would ensure they faced the consequences of their actions. The husband knew that the first thing he needed to do was protect his financial assets. Jane had access to their joint accounts, and though she hadn't made any questionable withdrawals yet, he wasn't about to give her the opportunity. He spent an entire day meeting with his bank, closing joint accounts and transferring funds into a private account she couldn't touch. He reviewed their investments and ensured all his critical assets were secure. Every penny he had worked for over the decades was now under his control. As he combed through their financial records, another thought struck him: Alice's wedding. He had already committed tens of thousands of dollars to cover the costs, from the venue to catering. The very idea of spending that money on a daughter who had betrayed him made his stomach turn. That night he added a note to his to-do list: speak to the lawyer about wedding expenses. He would make it clear that not another cent would go toward a wedding for someone who had lied to his face. The betrayal from his daughters hurt almost as much as Jane's affair. Maddie's tearful apologies rang hollow in his mind, and Alice's cold indifference only fueled his resolve. He decided that if they had chosen to side with their mother, they would no longer benefit from his hard work. The next day he contacted his lawyer to revise his will. It was a painful decision, but he felt it was the only way to ensure his legacy wouldn't be tarnished by their actions. He removed both Alice and Maddie as beneficiaries, redirecting his savings, retirement fund, and property to his sister and her children, family members who had always supported him. When his lawyer asked if he was sure about the decision, he didn't hesitate. "They made their choices," he said simply. "Now I'm making mine." The husband knew Jane would likely try to manipulate the divorce proceedings. He needed someone aggressive, someone who would ensure Jane didn't walk away with more than she deserved. After consulting with several attorneys, he chose one with a reputation for being tough and unrelenting. He explained the situation in detail, showing the lawyer the messages he had discovered, the photo of Jane with her boss, and the lies from Alice and Maddie. "I want this to be as clean and quick as possible," he said, his voice firm. "But I also want to make sure she doesn't benefit from what she's done." The lawyer reassured him that infidelity was a significant factor in divorce proceedings and that Jane's actions wouldn't go unnoticed. For the first time in weeks, the husband felt a sense of relief. He was taking control of his life again, one step at a time. Though his actions were calculated, they didn't come without emotional toll. Each step he took felt like a knife twisting deeper into the life he had once cherished. The memories of family dinners, holidays, and shared milestones haunted him as he made these decisions. But he reminded himself why he was doing it. Jane had betrayed him, and his daughters had chosen to protect her lies. They had made their decisions without considering the pain they would cause him. Now he had to put his emotions aside and focus on what was best for himself. Before filing for divorce, he decided to meet Jane one last time. It wasn't to seek closure or hear her excuses again. He had heard enough. Instead, he wanted to make it clear that he was no longer the man she could manipulate. When they met, Jane looked fragile, her once confident demeanor replaced by visible fear. "Please, we can work this out," she pleaded. "Think about the girls. Think about everything we've built." He didn't flinch. "Everything we built?" he said, his tone cold. "You're the one who tore it down. This marriage is over, Jane. You'll hear from my lawyer soon." She tried to argue, but he silenced her with a firm statement. "I'm done letting you control the narrative. You made your choices. Now you'll face the consequences." As he left, he couldn't help but glance at the family photos on the wall. They no longer felt like cherished memories, they were reminders of the lies that had unraveled his life. Without hesitation, he took one off the wall and shattered it against the floor. With every calculated step, the husband felt a growing sense of empowerment. This wasn't about revenge for revenge's sake. It was about reclaiming his dignity and ensuring that those who had betrayed him understood the gravity of their actions. By securing his finances, revising his will, and hiring a lawyer, he had taken control of his future. No longer the victim of Jane's deceit or his daughter's betrayal, he was now the architect of his own destiny. Though the path ahead was still uncertain, one thing was clear. He was no longer the man who would silently endure the pain inflicted by those he trusted. He was stronger, wiser, and ready to start anew. As he left the lawyer's office that day, he took a deep breath. For the first time in weeks, he felt lighter. The storm wasn't over, but he was finally steering his own ship, and he wasn't looking back. The aftermath of the confrontation was swift and brutal. Jane's carefully constructed world began to crumble around her as the reality of her actions caught up with her. The husband, now firm in his decisions, had initiated divorce proceedings and shut her out of every part of his life. He had stopped responding to her calls and messages, leaving her to face the consequences of her betrayal alone. Jane quickly realized that she had underestimated the husband's resolve. She had hoped for tears, anger, or even an attempt at reconciliation, but what she faced instead was his cold indifference. He had taken control of their finances, filed for divorce, and left her with no way to manipulate the situation to her advantage. Her desperation grew with each passing day. She sent him countless messages, begging for another chance. "I made a mistake. Please, let's talk. We can fix this, I'll do anything." But every message went unanswered. Jane's life outside the marriage wasn't faring much better. Her boss, the man she had risked everything for, distanced himself from her the moment the affair became public knowledge. What she thought was a passionate relationship turned out to be nothing more than a fleeting fling for him. With her personal and professional lives in shambles, Jane found herself isolated and uncertain of what lay ahead. For the first time in decades, she was truly alone. Maddie, the younger daughter, was consumed by guilt. She had always been closer to her father and couldn't shake the weight of betraying his trust. After their emotional conversation in the park, she continued to send him messages, desperate to make amends. "Dad, I'll never forgive myself for what I did. Please don't shut me out. I'll do whatever it takes to fix this. I just want my dad back." Her regret was genuine, but the husband found it difficult to fully believe her sincerity. He couldn't forget the lies she had told to protect Jane, nor the pain she had caused by choosing her mother over him. Maddie's boyfriend even reached out on her behalf. "Sir, Maddie is devastated. She can't stop crying. She doesn't care about the money, she just wants to fix things with you." But the husband remained distant. Though he still loved Maddie, the hurt ran too deep for him to easily forgive. He needed time to process her actions and decide if their relationship could ever be repaired. Alice, on the other hand, reacted very differently. Unlike Maddie, she refused to acknowledge any wrongdoing on her part. In her eyes, the husband was overreacting and blowing the situation out of proportion. She sent him a cold, accusatory email. "I can't believe you're punishing me for trying to keep the peace. You're ruining our family over one mistake. This has nothing to do with me and I don't deserve to be treated like this." Her words only fueled his disappointment. Alice's refusal to take responsibility for her actions or even express remorse made it clear that she had chosen her side, and it wasn't his. The husband couldn't reconcile this version of Alice with the daughter he had raised. She was supposed to be the mature, level-headed one, yet she had dismissed his pain as irrelevant and justified her betrayal as a means of keeping the peace. For the first time, he seriously considered cutting Alice out of his life entirely. Her coldness and denial made it difficult for him to see any path forward for their relationship. Amidst the fallout, the husband found himself growing stronger. The pain of betrayal had once consumed him, but as time passed, he began to reclaim his independence and dignity. He threw himself into rebuilding his life. The house, once filled with memories of a life he thought he had, became a symbol of his fresh start. He removed all traces of Jane and the daughters, redecorating and creating a space that reflected his new chapter. For the first time in years, he began focusing on himself. He reconnected with old friends, picked up hobbies he had long abandoned, and even started exploring new opportunities. The betrayal had left scars, but it had also taught him invaluable lessons about resilience and self-worth. The final step in his journey was revising his will. It was a painful decision, but he knew it was necessary. Alice and Maddie had made their choices, and he couldn't risk leaving his legacy in the hands of those who had betrayed him. His sister and her children, who had always supported him, were named as his new beneficiaries. The decision wasn't without backlash. Jane emailed him accusing him of being vindictive. "This will ruin our family forever. Please don't punish the girls for my mistakes." Alice sent another scathing email, "You're being petty and ruining my wedding. Is that what you want?" Maddie, however, responded differently. She called him in tears, pleading for forgiveness. "Dad, I don't care about the money. I just want to fix this. Please don't shut me out forever." Though her words softened him slightly, he remained firm. "I need time, Maddie," he said. "Maybe someday, but not now." As the weeks passed, the husband began to feel lighter. The anger and heartbreak that once consumed him were gradually replaced by a sense of peace. He wasn't fully healed, but he was on the path to recovery. Jane, Maddie, and Alice were left to grapple with the consequences of their choices, while the husband focused on building a future free from deceit and betrayal. For the first time in years, he felt like he could breathe again. His life wasn't perfect, but it was his, and that was enough. Sitting in his newly redecorated home, the husband reflected on everything that had happened. The betrayal, the heartbreak, and the fallout had changed his life forever. At one point, it felt like the end of the world, like the foundation he had built his life upon had been irreparably shattered. But now, with some distance from the chaos, he saw it differently. He had always believed that trust was unbreakable in a family built on love. He trusted Jane implicitly, never questioning her loyalty. He trusted his daughters, raising them to value honesty and integrity. But trust, he realized, is fragile. Jane's betrayal taught him that even the most familiar faces can hide secrets, and Alice and Maddie's complicity showed him that loyalty can be twisted. The pain of discovering their lies had been overwhelming, but it had also opened his eyes to the importance of boundaries and self-respect. People will show you who they truly are through their actions, he thought. It's up to you to believe them. Though his actions, securing his finances, revising his will, and confronting Jane and the girls, were necessary, he realized they weren't about revenge. They were about reclaiming control over his life. There was no satisfaction in watching Jane's desperation or Alice's anger. Maddie's regret, though genuine, didn't undo the hurt she had caused. Ultimately, his decisions were about protecting himself and setting boundaries. For the first time in years, he was focusing on his own well-being. He started therapy to work through the emotional scars, spent more time outdoors, and reconnected with friends who had always stood by him. Self-healing became his priority, and with every small step, he felt a little stronger. With the divorce proceedings moving forward, he began envisioning a new chapter in his life, one unburdened by deceit. The house, once a painful reminder of what he had lost, was now a blank slate. He redecorated it to reflect his individuality, turning it into a place where he could feel at peace. He also set goals for the future. Travel, hobbies, and even the idea of opening himself to new relationships someday felt possible. Life was no longer about surviving the betrayal, it was about creating something better from the ruins. To those watching his story, he had a simple message: your choices define your future. He had spent years believing in the perfection of his family, only to see it crumble under the weight of bad choices. Jane's decisions, Alice and Maddie's complicity, they had all chosen paths that led to betrayal. And while he couldn't control their actions, he could control his response. To anyone who feels like their world is falling apart, he said, remember this: you have the power to rebuild. It won't be easy, but every step forward is a victory. If this story resonated with you, share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever experienced a betrayal like this? How did you handle it? I'd love to hear your stories. And don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to Unheard Stories. We share powerful raw tales of betrayal, heartbreak, and healing, stories that remind us all of the strength it takes to move forward. Turn on notifications so you never miss another story. And remember, no matter what you're facing, you're stronger than you think. Here's to new beginnings. See you in the next story.